everybody. Hey, welcome to our final mid-quarter roundtable of the year. Usually we talk about markets, economics, rates, housing, elections, anything related to your financial situation, but more importantly, there are things that affect your personal well-being. Well, today we thought we'd take this discussion in a little bit different direction, but something that very much affects your life on a daily basis. First off, no, we did not replace Kyle, at least permanently, but we do have a very special guest today to introduce. This is Dr. Melissa Milanak, a renowned licensed psychologist and executive consultant who specializes in something we all care about, which is sleep. Just a couple quick notes to introduce Melissa. She's got over 20 years of experience in anxiety, sleep disorders, and stress. She got her PhD in clinical and community psychology from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, which is really important to me. I had to mention that. Currently, she's a faculty member at the Medical University of South Carolina, and she does speaking and training throughout the USA and internationally, including recent talks for Barron's and the CDC. And today we thought we'd have a discussion around one of our most popular talks, which is understanding sleep and anxiety for optimal performance. Welcome, Melissa, and I think we can all say we're really fired up to have you here today.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to have the conversation.
Perfect. We thought we'd just start with, kind of the basics, like what made you decide to study sleep in the first place, and, why is it important, and why did you make a career out of it?
Sure. Well, I actually started in the world of PTSD and trauma. And I was originally thinking I was going to go to medical school, and then I was in college during 9/11 and completely shift gears. And that's where I really turned to want to do more work with trauma and PTSD. So the summer after, in May of 2002, I started going to Northern Ireland and doing work with the conflict and the troubles, and spent the last 22 years back and forth working with colleagues and doing that work. And then from there, I've spent the last 6 years now working in South Africa, doing work with communities post-apartheid, with new generations coming up, designing treatments to help children to be able to sleep and deal with their trauma. And it really has just built over the 20 years of, as I was doing more and more work in the trauma PTSD space, that the most common symptom, the most prevalent symptom was sleep disruption. And not just nightmares, but the inability to fall asleep, to stay asleep, all of these things that so many people struggle with. So I started spending more and more time in the sleep space. And next thing you know, it's, can you work with my teams? And professional athletes are having questions about sleep, and corporate executives, and doing a lot of work with our military. And it built and grew from there. And for me, what I've learned is you help somebody to sleep better, and you can really help to give them their lives back. You help them and their families, and it has such the opportunity for impact. So love doing the work with the stress and anxiety and trauma and addictions and how it all comes together. But sleep really came out to be the foundational core that impacts so much of it.
Good. Yeah. I mean, you want to talk a little bit about stages of sleep. I mean, the way we see sleep, or at least the way I see sleep, is I just see my kids and, they knock out and never wake up. And as we get older, it seems to be more and more difficult to not only just go to sleep, but stay asleep. And you're not really sure why it happens. But I think everybody listening to this, all of our clients can relate to the idea that as you get older, it gets harder and harder to get good sleep.
There's so much when we talk about that. I think the first thing is you talked about how sleep works is a really important thing to understand. So when we sleep, we go through a process that's made up of stages of sleep and cycles of sleep. And so how that process is working, most people, when you're first falling asleep, you're going to enter into stage 1 sleep. It's about 10 to 15 minutes. That's where people experience that myoclonic jerk, that feeling of falling, hence falling asleep. It's only usually about, say, 2 to 5% of your sleep the whole night. And if you wake up during it, most people wouldn't even know that you have fallen asleep. I always joke and say that's when you're getting in trouble with your significant other because you dozed off and they caught you.
Yeah, like you're not quite asleep yet.
Exactly. Then you get to stage 2, and think of it as a transition stage. You wouldn't go from first gear to third gear without shifting through second. We need to have this transition stage to go back and forth between our body healing and our mind healing, both which get that attention during restorative sleep at night. Next, we're going to see stage 3 sleep. And for those folks that have done a sleep study, or if you have the wearable devices and such, you'll hear people talk about that as deep sleep or slow wave sleep. And that's where we see the physical body repairing itself. One thing that's important to note is typically when we're sleeping, we'll see a prioritization on the body being healed first. It's survival. If I'm hiking in the woods and I hear rustling in the trees, I want my legs to work so I can run away. If my brain is sharp but I can't protect myself, I'm not going to survive. And so the reason that's so important is for many people, when we're not getting enough sleep, we may wake up and feel somewhat rested, but our brain isn't as sharp as we want it to be because we didn't get the important stages of sleep for brain repair and emotion regulation. So those first 3 stages usually make up the first cycle of sleep. Cycles of sleep usually last about an hour and a half to 2 hours, and the typical sleeper usually gets about 4 to 5 at night. Now, once we're done with that and we start over, with our next cycle, we don't have to go through stage 1 again because we're already asleep. So now we're going to see the first instance of REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, that we hear people talking about. This is where we're going to see the majority of our brain doing that repair and cognitive repair. So your brain's going to take everything throughout the day and say, okay, do I need to remember if I had oatmeal or bagel for breakfast? It was good. I don't need to remember that. Should I remember what my Strong Valley advisors were telling me? That's important. I should probably remember that later and lock that away. This is also where we're going to see our emotions are going to be the balance and regulation. And this is where the majority of dreaming occurs. Now, I know we were talking before about dreaming, and I do want to touch on that for a second. One of the keys to note is that during REM sleep, and especially as dreaming is occurring, is where many times we see the majority of sleep apnea episodes occurring. The reason that this is happening is when we're dreaming, our bodies are going to go into a paralysis to protect us. Have you ever seen the dog chasing the squirrel? Well, now you're acting out your dreams in bed and you're injuring the person sleeping next to you, or you're throwing yourself out of bed.
Yeah.
So your body's going to go into that paralysis to protect itself. But it's not that your muscles are really tight and tense. It's that they lose all muscle tone. Have you ever picked up a 4-year-old and they feel like that heavy sack of potatoes?
Yeah.
So that's what our muscles do. But think of it this way. So if I have my airway, can I borrow your pen for a second? So if this is my airway and my hands are my neck muscles and I go into that paralysis, well, when it loses muscle tone, they're going to collapse.
Yeah.
So see how that puts more pressure on the airway? And so that's where we're going to see more of the obstructions occurring. So it's important to note that people with untreated sleep apnea that are afraid to wear their CPAP machines, that won't do what they need to do that, not only does it impact their heart health, but it also can impact their brain being able to get the right kind of sleep that it needs. Because your body is going to wake you up when you hit REM sleep so that you start breathing again. And so that's, again, where some of that survival comes in. So for the rest of the night, we'll go back and forth between REM sleep for our mind repair and deep sleep for our body repair. And so this is where we'll eventually get into where we talk about the magic number of how much sleep we need. Because if the typical sleeper gets about 4 hours of sleep and you cycle through about an hour and a half at a time, 1 hour and a half to 3 hours to 4.5 to 6 hours to get through 4 cycles. But if you're a 2-hour cycler, 2, 4, 6, 8 to do the same thing. So just like metabolism, where one person
And how
needs,
do you know cycles? That's just a personal dependent thing?
Well, in general, you typically cycle through about an hour and a half to 2 hours. And it depends on how much time your body's able to spend in each of those stages of sleep in each cycle to make sure that you're getting as much repair that your body needs. But you also have to be asleep long enough to get through the whole process.
Yeah.
So if your body, it's just like metabolism, right? So one person needs 1,800 calories, one person needs 2,200. They look exactly the same, but their body processes the nutrients different.
Like a genetic thing. So some people just require a 2-hour cycle and some people require an hour and a half cycle.
And it's not something that we can specifically try to purposely change, because people will say that all the time.
Sure.
Well, I want to train myself to need less sleep so I can get more done.
Right.
And unfortunately, it doesn't exactly work that way. But that's a big part of figuring out how much sleep we need. And there's so many people that need different amounts. So I'll pick on the 3 of you for a second. Do any of you wear the shoe size 10.5?
No.
Okay. Case in point. So 10.5 is the average man's shoe size right now in the U.S. So the same thing with sleep, where 8 hours is the average. But there are a lot of people that need more and a lot of people that need less. But because our brains are telling us that we need the average, well, people will only afford themselves 8 hours of sleep. Those that need more, they're exhausted. And everybody's thinking, well, they're lazy or something's wrong. And those that need less wake up after 6 or 7 hours, feel great, look at the clock, and now they immediately feel tired because their brain was doing an override and told them they should get more sleep.
Right.
And so that's why it's going to be really important to figure out how much sleep you need so that your body can purposely get the right amount and spend that time in the mind repair and body repair so you can get the most effective sleep.
How does one really determine how long those cycles should be for you individually?
Well, in terms of not so much just the individual cycles, but it really comes down to the number of hours that you should be sleeping. And so what we want to do is typically what we find is that a lot of people are going to have that overarching thought of it has to be 8 hours. Mm-hmm. But what we need to do instead is do a process to determine how much sleep you currently need at the current stage of life, because it changes over the course of our lives. So this is kind of the terrible joke that the universe plays on us, is that we're younger and we feel like we're always tired and we never seem to have enough time for sleep. And then we hit retirement and we're up at 3 a.m. and we can't fall back to sleep and we're wide awake. Mm-hmm. But if you think about how sleep is important for that cell growth and regeneration, we hit a certain point of our life and the only growth spurts are our waistlines. We're trying to stop those. So it's okay for some people to say, maybe I've gone to bed at 9 or 10 my entire life. I used to get up at 6 or 7. Now I'm waking up at 4 or 5. It doesn't automatically mean something's wrong. Think about how much sleep a newborn gets versus a 6-month-old, a 2-year-old, a 10-year-old. It's the same thing as portion size. I know I keep comparing it to food, but think about, if we think of like the senior specials, and as we hit a certain point where we don't need as many nutrients because our body isn't as active. So the first piece is that it's going to change over the course of our lives, but how we figure out the specific number, there's a 4-step process, and that's kind of through the process of setting up the sleep window. Do you want me to jump into that?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, please.
Sure.
I think everybody's already trying to figure out what their number is.
Sure.
I know
100%.
that becomes one of the biggest things. And so what I'm going to share with you all, it's actually a strategy that is been identified as one of the gold standards to treat sleep. It's actually found is part of a treatment called CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. And so if anybody listening, if you've been struggling with insomnia and having difficulty with sleep problems, there are a lot of providers that have this background. And the great thing is literally within a few weeks, you can help people to sleep better without having to take a lot of medications, without having to self-medicate. We've seen it work. I've seen it work personally across the spectrum with professional athletes, corporate executives, military, stay-at-home moms, retirees, everybody under the sun.
Yeah.
So how it works is we need to re-identify what's called your sleep window. And we're going to do it through a 4-step process. So if you all want to play along, step
Absolutely.
1 is we need to identify how much sleep you are currently getting. So you want to take your 7 days in the week and get the average. And right now, you may have different times during the week and the weekends. We're going to fix that and become more consistent. But if for any reason your average number is less than 5, your new number is 5. For everyone else, we need to be more realistic about it. So time in bed is not time asleep. And if you're awake in the middle of the night and all the tossing and turning, we're not going to count that. We're not going to pad the number because we're anxious and we're worried, well, if I'm not in bed long enough, I'm not going to get enough sleep. We need to start with reality. If the number is just 6, that's okay. We'll teach you how to build and grow that. And we're going to make those 6 hours more productive. So step 1, get your number. And this is where we are right now. Step 2 is we need to determine the when to get the sleep. And so that's where, as we're talking about getting the ideal number, we have to start with reality, and we're going to follow this 4-step process to get to the ideal number.
Mm-hmm.
So step 1 is the number. Step 2, for the when, we actually work backwards. So I want you to start with the earliest that you have to wake up. So maybe on Tuesdays and Thursdays, you're up at 6 a.m. because you have a workout that day. Maybe it's 5 a.m. on the weekends because you're going to get up and go fishing or do a long run or take your kids or your grandkids to travel ball or whatever it is. Whatever that earliest wake up, that is going to become your new wake up time for the next 7 days. That means you may get up at 5 or 6 on Saturday or Sunday, but it's okay because when you're getting enough sleep, you don't need to sleep the day away to catch up. And by the way, it takes 4 days to make up for 1 hour of sleep. So that 2-day weekend is not enough to catch up,
Right.
but we can talk about that later. So we take our wake time, say 6 a.m. We take our number from step 1, and we're going to work backwards to get the full sleep window. So if it's 6 a.m. and 6 hours, that means my new bedtime is 12 midnight.
Mm-hmm.
Now, midnight might feel really late. So if that's the problem, we can make it 11 to 5. We can make it 10 to 4, but we're not stretching the window.
Yeah, you got to keep the window. I get it.
Right. And let me give you an example. So if I had 6 inches of pizza dough and I put it in a 6-inch pie pan, it'd be nice and thick and even. But if I have more friends coming to dinner and I have to take those 6 inches and make it stretch into a 10-inch pie pan, it'll fit. I always say I'm Italian and I'm stubborn. I'll make it fit.
Yeah.
But it's going to have holes and gaps because there's not enough to fill the space. Well, if we've built up 6 hours of sleepiness, but we're trying to make it fit into a 10-hour window because it's cold outside, I want to hide from my kids, I spent a lot of money on that mattress, whatever the reason is, no wonder we're waking up more times. And so that's why this strategy, not only does it help us to figure out the ideal number, but it also helps us to squeeze out all of those awakenings.
So if I understand you correctly, you're starting at the bottom. You're starting with your baseline of whatever the lowest number is.
Correct.
And so if I've been averaging, we'll use me.
Yes.
Let's say I've been averaging somewhere between 6 and 7. Sometimes I'll get lucky and it'll be more, but sometimes it'll be way worse and it'll be like 4 or 5 hours. But if the average, let's say, is around 6, then that's my number today.
That's your number today to start with.
And if I wake up at, let's say, 5 a.m., then that means my new bedtime.
Earliest wake up.
Right. Then that means my new bedtime for now is 11 p.m., which seems very late to me because I spend a lot of time just either playing on my phone or waking up or whatever.
Right.
So I'm
But
squeezing in the window.
so think about like squeezing the air out of a Ziploc bag, right? Or, or people used to talk about defragging computers and such. So what we're doing is instead of having fragmented sleep, because you know how we talked about those stages of sleep? Well, at the beginning of the night, you're spending more time with your body healing and repairing. And then it's at the end of sleep where we're spending more time in that REM sleep with our brain repairing. Every time we wake up, we have to start that process over. So if you're waking up 2, 3, 4 times in the middle of the night, it's a lot harder to get to that REM sleep at the end.
It makes sense, but it seems so counterintuitive. I'm going to get more sleep by going to bed later.
But see, here's the thing.
Right? But I get it.
Right. So and what's happening is you're actually getting more restorative sleep because your brain and body aren't having to constantly work to start over again. Just like Chutes and Ladders as a kid where you kept going back to the beginning, we want to be able to get all the way through the process. So it's the amount of sleep, right? So we need to make sure we've built up enough sleepiness to sleep all the way through the night, but it's also the quality of the sleep. So that's why you start with your earliest wake up. And part of the reason that it's so important to start with the earliest wake up is then our body and brain is always going to know what it has to work with. So if maybe sometime we stay up late, it was New Year's Eve, or we were watching a sporting event, or whatever the reason was, and we usually go to bed at 11, but now you're going to bed at 1. Well, if you're still going to get up at 5, your brain knows, okay, I have this much to work with. I'm going to optimize how much time I'm healing my body and how much time I'm healing my mind.
So is that a good habit anyway, just for generality for life? It's just you should always try to wake up around the same time, go to bed around the same time, kind of create those habits?
One of the best things that you can do, as we talked about, what are the take-homes, is have a consistent bedtime and wake time 7 days a week. Because think about it. If you eat dinner at 7 every night, your body knows when to feel hungry. You start feeling hungry around 6:30.
Yeah.
If you eat at all different times, you're more likely to have cravings throughout the day because your body doesn't know when it's getting the next meal. So that's something that we actually see from a weight loss standpoint, is that if you're eating consistently at the same time every day, your body doesn't hoard extra calories as much because it knows when the next meal is going to come. It's the same thing with sleep. So a consistent bedtime and wake time. So that's why we start with our current number. Then we get our window. And again, if for you, say 11 to 5, that feels late. We could make it 10 to 4. But what we're going to do over the next few weeks is we're eventually going to make that window bigger. And so the wake time is never going to change. So that's why I have people start with the wake time and work backwards. And then
Just go to
that's
bed
where we go.
earlier to get more
Correct.
time.
Now, I do have to give a quick caveat that if we have anyone listening that has untreated sleep apnea, we're not going to want to make the modifications that we're talking about because I want them to wake up because their body is purposely waking them up to breathe because they're having those apnea episodes.
Right.
But for the typical sleeper, this is how the process works. So we identify our number, we set the window. Step 3 is stick to it for 7 days. Now, here's what I mean when I'm really saying stick to it. That means that if my bedtime, we'll use yours, is 11 p.m., you're not getting in bed at 10 p.m. to read or to watch TV.
So I don't play on my phone for an extra hour?
You can do that somewhere outside of your bed,
In the living room.
but not
Well, but
in your
electronics
bed.
though, right? I'm sure you're going to touch on that.
Oh, we'll talk about
Okay.
We'll talk about tech.
Yeah.
But that is the
But
piece.
don't be in the bed.
You want to be doing it. So your bed should be reserved for sleep and romantic activity. That's it. Anything else, your brain is confused. Am I supposed to be awake right now? Should I be processing what I'm reading? Should I be paying attention to that email that I'm checking? Or should I be trying to fall asleep? Part of the problem is that we go throughout the day. We don't give our brain the chance to decompress anymore. And then we climb in bed and we immediately want it to shut off. But I'll say to you, if any of you like to cook, would you take a casserole out of the oven and immediately put it in the refrigerator?
Or I thought you were going to say take it into bed.
Oh, we'll talk about eating and
Also
sleep as
frowned
well.
upon.
Yeah, you don't. No eating in bed. I didn't realize I didn't mention no eating in bed, no reading, watching TV.
And that makes sense because
But-
we're all on our phones at night.
Yes.
And so maybe it makes sense to actually, trick your brain into thinking that the bed is for sleeping. So if you're going to be on your phone,
It's not a trick.
be on the couch.
truth.
Well,
Well,
you're-
think of it this way. If I said to you, I'm going to go to the movies, what snack am I most likely going to get? What would you say?
Popcorn.
So your brain immediately says movies, popcorn. I want your brain to immediately say bed, sleep.
Yeah.
Not bed, stress and process and plan. Not bed, my office. So that's this is the same reason that people fall asleep on the couch, wake up 2 hours later and then can't fall asleep in their bed. Because their brain associates the couch with where they sleep or their comfy
Yeah,
chair.
I don't charge my phone on the nightstand anymore.
Yeah, so it's interesting concept. So you're talking, it's really more about training. People think it's more random that, I'm just not getting good sleep and I don't know why. And then when you really start analyzing your training, we were talking about college earlier, right?
Yeah.
Like, remember when college and 9 o'clock class was super early? Well, you trained yourself to stay up all night and, get up later. And it's not, again, it's not an age thing. It's a training thing. And so as you get older, right, and you haven't start getting up earlier, then, things just shift back. But no, it's very interesting.
So there's actually a really interesting point as you talk about kind of college age and teens and adolescents. So I'm going to deviate from the 4-step process for a second, because I think this is something that a lot of people don't realize, is that there's actually a bit of a survival component as to when people are awake and when people are sleeping. What I mean by that is, if you think for centuries, who were the individuals in the communities that were the protectors?
Younger.
It was usually the young, so they would hit puberty, and then like the 12 to 14-year-olds, and kind of from that time to the early 20s. And so they were the ones that were the hunters, the gatherers, and the protectors. Who do you want to be awake when it's the highest risk of threat? It'd be them. So why do you think your teens can't go to bed until 11, midnight, 1 in the morning? It's because their body is designed, their circadian rhythm is designed that once they hit that puberty stage, for them to be awake when it's darkest outside, because that's when there was the highest risk of attack and threat. And so they build up that sleepiness, and then they're able to override the typical where it's light out and sleep. So they're now sleeping because they still need 9 to 10 hours.
Mhm.
You typically see people needing at least 9 to 10 hours through their early 20s, because the brain doesn't finish developing until around age 24 to 27. And for your entertainment, the last parts that develop are judgment, decision-making, and impulse control.
Shocking.
So I'll leave that there. But the idea behind it is, so we wanted them to be awake. But then as we got older, then we started to get tired earlier and earlier, so that the young and the older are sleeping, we'll say more mature, are sleeping when that group is awake. So then they wake up 2, 3, 4 in the morning, so they can protect while now that group is sleeping and the sun is starting to come up. It's easier to see threats around. Remember, we talked about how food is also on the same schedule. Well, think about where restaurants and bars are open in college towns versus the early bird special in retirement communities.
Yep.
So it makes sense that sleep change will also shift from a survival standpoint as well as from a necessity standpoint.
For kids in puberty, you have the studies showing if it's the same with boys and girls?
Yeah, it's really interesting where you're seeing there's some really great studies that are looking at what their schedule is during the week with school, and then what their schedule is on the weekends when they're able, and literally we see as much as an hour or two later in terms of them going to bed and waking up. And they do see pretty gender neutral on those studies for the younger kids. But it's really strong, especially we see for boys. But we see pretty much a balance with the two. Do you want me to cycle back to the rest of the
Go
four
ahead and
steps?
finish the 4-step, and then we'll keep going with other things too.
Love it, yeah. And that's why, there's so many of these pieces that are intertwined and make sense. And once we understand it, it helps us to start to be able to realize that we don't have to feel hopeless about our sleep. And that's what I really love about working in this area, is you get people to feel like they can take back control over something that for the longest time they felt helpless in.
Right.
And you start sleeping better. It's amazing how it impacts everything. So we figure out our number. We have our windows. So we said 11 to 5. So now with the stick to it, so that bedtime, that means that at 11 o'clock for you, turning off the lights, getting in bed, head on the pillow. Now, if you wake up 3, 4, 5 times in the middle of the night, if you don't get much sleep, it doesn't matter. You're still going to get out of bed when the alarm goes off at 5 a.m. And yes, you're going to feel tired. And it's okay to expect that. We all have had at least one night in our lives where we didn't sleep well. We got up the next day and we survived.
Monday.
Exactly. But
Every Monday.
But the thing is,
Tuesday.
But that's the whole point, right?
Right.
Is that, and you want to feel tired. Because then if you feel tired, it's going to be easier to fall asleep the next night.
Mm-hmm.
If you miss lunch, you're more hungry at dinner. So now we're going to stay awake. We're going to push through because we have more sleep inertia. So we push through the awakenings. Now, here's the quick thing with awakenings. It is typical for people to wake up about once a night. A bladder break, use the restroom, whatever it is. If you wake up, you get back in bed, you're back asleep within about 5 to 10 minutes. That is common. That's nothing to worry about.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're now up for 30, 40 minutes, or you're up 2, 3, 4, 5 times a night, that's when we start to see more of that disruption. The other key, we talked about our bedtime and wake time and stick to it. That also means that you're not going to take a nap. Here's the thing with naps. He's like, oh, you're taking away everything.
I don't have that luxury.
So did your mom ever tell you, gentlemen, don't eat a snack, you'll ruin your dinner?
Sure.
Yeah.
So that's where we say don't take a nap, it'll ruin your sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Because what happens is that we talked about how we need to get to that REM sleep at the end. Well, if I need a full 8 hours, but I take a 2 hour nap and now I only have 6 hours of sleepiness, I'm not getting to the end of that cycle.
Mhm.
So in general, too, if you take a nap at the same time every day, your body learns that that's when it gets rest. And so it's going to make you feel tired at that time every day because that's where it's getting that rejuvenation.
I mean, for those that have the time, though, what are the pros and cons to naps?
So typically with a nap, you're not going to be able to get through all of the cycles and get the restorative sleep that you need. A lot of people might nap for about an hour. Well, if we think of the way that the sleep cycles work, about an hour is just enough time to start to get into deep sleep. That's why you wake up from your nap and you feel more tired and more groggy.
What about like the 10-minute nap or the 15-minute nap? Or we've all heard those things.
Power nap.
But that's exactly what I was going to say next. So if you're going to take a nap at all, we want it to be a power nap. 20 to 30 minutes max, nothing more than that, because it's not long enough to get into other stages. The issue with waking up in deep sleep is there's different brain waves at different stages of sleep. So REM sleep is very similar to being awake. Have you ever woken up out of a dream and you like, oh, am I awake? Was this reality?
Yeah.
Deep sleep is different brain waves. So it's almost like shutting off your car in third gear without downshifting to neutral. It takes a little bit for your brain to get back to the awake stage. That's why you wake up and feel more tired and groggy. So that's where the quick power nap, it's not going to be enough to get into the wrong stages of sleep for you to feel exhausted. It's not going to deplete your sleep at night. It's like having that scoop of peanut butter instead of eating the whole bag of Skittles or something like that, where it gives enough to give that little boost. So I'm not saying you'll never take a nap again, but we want it to be exceptions versus rules, and we want it to be that shorter power nap. There are lots of pros that we talk about with using the power nap, but we also don't want to have to need it every day because we're not getting the restful, restorative sleep at night.
So 20 to 30 minutes.
20, 30
Kind of the
minutes,
max, yeah.
power nap. Yep. So you got our number. We have our window.
We're leaving people
We
hanging.
stuck to it for a few days. Well, and it's funny because this is what I say. I said, if you've had poor sleep for weeks, months, years, give me days. So you do this first week, and now step 4, we get to evaluate and adjust. And so here's the thing. We want to be efficient sleepers. 90 to 95% of the time that you're in bed, you should be asleep. So that means falling asleep within 10 to 15 minutes, sleeping straight through the night, minus the bladder break, and waking up and feeling rested. If that's you, you've hit your sleep sweet spot. Congratulations. For everyone else, it's time to adjust. Now, for some people, they'll find that they were still waking up a lot. Again, not the sleep apnea folks, but if you're still waking up a lot, you probably padded the number the first time because you were worried that you weren't going to get enough sleep. And we're going to have to actually shrink the window a little bit to squeeze out those awakenings. For everyone else who's now sleeping through the night, but they're still feeling tired when they wake up, that's the great part. That means now we get to gift them more sleep. Now, believe it or not, 15 minutes is enough to adjust your entire sleep schedule. So we're going to add 15 minutes to the bedtime. So that means we did 11 to 5. Mm-hmm. Now you're going to do 10:45 to 5 and do that for 7 days. And then 10:30 to 5 and do that for 7 days until you hit that sleep spot of falling asleep, sleeping through the night, and waking up and feeling rested and not needing the nap.
So you keep increasing the 15 minutes every week until you start waking up again in the middle of the night. And now you know you have too much.
And that's how you can basically titrate it down to get your ideal sleep number for your current stage.
That makes sense.
The other great thing about it is now we've done the impossible. We just created more hours in your day. Because instead of spending 10 hours in bed to get 6 hours of sleep, you're spending 6 hours in bed to get 6 hours of sleep, which means you now have 4 more hours to do all the things you wanted to do. And so that's one of the great things is now all the things that we've been cutting into our sleep to try to fit in, we now actually have the time to do it. We've taken back control over it. And that sleep need will adjust. So if you're on that consistent schedule and all of a sudden you're realizing, wow, I'm feeling tired this week. Okay, well, let's figure out why I need to adjust. Am I exercising more and so my body needs more sleep? Have I been traveling? Am I getting sick? So once you have more consistency, then you can have a better idea of why you need some of those adjustments.
Jason, you want to
I have
start
a
with
plan.
questions or
Jason's
you want
only
me to-
got
you want me to get
75
started?
questions.
And I know you wanted to talk about tech and those things, but
Well, yeah. So tech has become real popular. I mean, everything from 8 Sleep to using the Apple Watch, the Oura Rings, the Whoop straps. There's everyone trying to measure and figure out how they're doing. For me, it's almost like just anxiety in the sense where it tells me how bad I am. But now until I have a plan, it's just I would hate looking at it. It's like, hey, you had horrible sleep again last night. Cool. Thanks for the information.
the news.
Just ruined my morning.
Yeah.
On to your day.
I haven't even started
This
my
is why
day.
you needed a psychologist that works with stress and anxiety too.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
And so I'm sure you're familiar with all of them. And so are there certain things that you think are just kind of nice to know but not that helpful? And then are there certain texts that you think are really things that people ought to give a try?
So I will say
Or
that
avoid it altogether?
so there's kind of the tech from the wearable and the tracking standpoint, and then there's tech from the disrupting your sleep standpoint. And so we'll start with the wearables and such. What we find in general is that nothing is going to 100% map on to an in-lab sleep study. You hear people say PSG, polysomnography, all of these different things. But there are a number of devices that can give pretty accurate information. The keys for those oftentimes, for the wearables at least, which is different than the mattresses and such, are to wear them during the day as well as at night. Because what it's doing is it's going to baseline off of your overall behavior and activity. So for instance, the ones that are going to give you the different sleep stages, it's helpful to know. In general, we ideally, about 20 to 25% of our sleep each night should be spent in that deep sleep with our body repairing, and about 20 to 25% in that REM sleep. Now, if you are doing the device and it's saying 19% or 26%, it doesn't mean that something's wrong, and that's part of it, where I get a small percentage of people where I say, no wearables for you, because it just makes them more anxious. Yeah. But for the typical person, what happens is when you're wearing it every single day and every night, after a few weeks, it baselines itself off of you. So the key is to look at the patterns. If you're seeing that you typically are getting, around 18% of something, and then all of a sudden you have a couple nights where you're getting a lot more or getting a lot less, then that's your indicator to figure out, what was I doing that had that impact on it? Or was there, for instance, a significant stressor, so I was spending a lot more time in REM sleep because I wasn't giving my brain the chance to process during the day, so it had to do it during sleep, and that's why I'm feeling, I'm not spending as much time with my body repairing, so I'm feeling tired. The reason that I like to have people wear it during the day as well is then you can get more accurate metrics of things like heart rate variability and your O2 saturation and such. So for instance, for people with sleep apnea, it's not always that they stop breathing. It can be that their ability to get the oxygen, that their oxygen levels drop. So there's different types of sleep apnea. And so these are some of the important things that as you track it throughout the course of the day, if it's significantly lower at night, then we start to understand we need to help you to breathe better, because then when your body doesn't have to work as hard to breathe, it can heal everything else. Heart rate variability is a really important metric that a lot of people don't understand. And the key behind it and why it's helpful to look at is that it's showing basically how can our body respond to threats, and how can it also decompress and relax. So the larger that number is, the better. So if there is a threat or we're exercising and our heart gets really high, we want it to be able to respond and do that in a healthy way. But we also want it to completely be able to relax and decompress. We don't want to go from boiling to simmering.
I see that number all the time, and I thought it was like an indicator of either your exhaustion or how, like, if you're about ready to get sick and you don't know that you're sick and it's coming on. Is there any correlation there?
Well, if your body and your brain are under stress and threat for whatever reason, then the heart rate variability range is going to start shrinking, because your body's not and your brain aren't going to completely let you get to full resting. It's kind of like going from the boiling kettle to simmering instead of really turning the burner off, because that extra hypervigilance, think about for people in certain circumstances where, okay, there's this ongoing stress and they never can really fully decompress. That's why we see that for a lot of people, that they carry so much tension in their bodies and don't realize it. And what happens is our brain is constantly scanning to check and look to see if there's any indicator of a threat, because it wants to protect us. It wants us to survive. So if our muscles are tense, if our heart's beating faster, if we're breathing faster, think of that fight or flight response. Right. That's our body preparing to protect itself. So if our heart rate is much higher and we're not having that variability and it can't fully relax, then our body is going to be on edge. And if you're running at higher RPMs for a long time, that you are going to be more likely to burn out and to feel sick, and to a lot of those things as well, because that puts more stress and strain on the system. So that's kind of where, from the wearable standpoint. Now, I personally like to see people use the wearables that don't have the screens on them, because, and that's where if we can talk for a moment about the not so helpful aspects of technology. So is that light is one of the biggest things that disrupt our sleep. So it's great when we have a lot of light. It tells our brain to be awake. So our optic nerve perceives light, sends messages to this little part of the brain, we'll call it the sleep switch, It says it's light out, the sun is out, be awake. It's dark out, be asleep.
So
Well-
I just want to throw in
Yeah.
for my parents at home.
Yeah.
So the TV does not help you sleep. Is that correct?
I mean, parent.
One parent, particular parent who swears that the TV is mandatory for helping you sleep. And there are studies on this. Just can't cite them.
So here's the thing with the TV.
She's being nice.
And whether it is, well,
It worked in college.
what
It
I
hasn't
have
worked since.
what I have learned is if I just say no, it doesn't help, people aren't exactly going to follow it. But if I explain to them why it doesn't help, then they at least have the reasoning behind it and can do what they want to do with their own due diligence.
Perfect.
What we know, there's a couple reasons with that. So in general, we talked about how we go throughout the day. Our brains are designed to process information. They need the chance to do that. But for most of us, we don't give it the chance. And then we crawl in bed. It's time to go to sleep. We're alone with our thoughts, and our brain is running and racing. And it could be mundane things, planning the next day. This is my grocery list. This is where I need to go. This is what I have to do. It doesn't always mean that it just has to be worrying, but our brain just does the processing that we didn't let it do throughout the day. You keep ignoring your computer, you eventually turn it off, and now all the updates are running in the background because you haven't been letting it do it. That's what your brain starts to do when you get in bed. So now we're listening to the podcast. We're doom scrolling on our technology. We're watching TV because it's distracting our brain just enough so that we can fall asleep. What we should actually be doing is, and I'll talk about this in a moment, are certain strategies to shut the brain off and let it process. And I always say, I can promise you that your great-grandparents didn't need that episode or that podcast to fall asleep because it did not exist. But we've become dependent on it. And part of that is because we no longer have set our other sleep triggers. Think about for kids. You have a whole bedtime process. You're going to have bath time and wash your face and brush your teeth and read a story or say your prayers or whatever it is. And that helps them to prepare and know it's time for sleep. We don't do that as adults. We just
Right.
go. Now,
Then you're on Twitter.
right. And now it's this
No,
video
it's
to
more
this
like,
video.
okay, the kids are in bed. Now we can
Now-
go back to real life.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's what happens for so many people.
Yeah.
So part of it is, but here's the thing, talk about TV. Have you ever noticed that the commercials are louder than the regular programming?
Yeah.
So not only is the light an issue, and that's what we talk, like the bright light tells our brain to be awake, but you're starting to fall asleep and that volume change wakes you back up again. Or, okay, well, fine, I'm not going to have the TV on. I'm just going to listen to something. Well, as you're falling asleep and your brain is processing and checking for threats, it's going to say, wait a minute, I don't recognize his voice. He's not supposed to be in bed with me. Who is this person? And it will cause these little micro awakenings where you don't even realize that you're waking up, but it's pulling you out of restorative sleep and you're hovering in that light sleep because it's trying to make sure that there's nothing that's going to injure you. So that's where our light in general can delay. I mean, there's studies looking at adolescents that it can delay their ability to fall asleep by up to 2 hours by being on screens.
Yeah.
And so that's also why we see so many people with melatonin deficiencies, because it used to be that when it would start to get dark and the sun would set, that change in light triggered our bodies to produce melatonin. Well, now we have these bright screens in front of us, and our brain never knows when it's time to actually start to prepare for sleep. So I'll ask you this. If you are crawling into bed and it's ready to go, time to go to sleep, why do you need to check your email? If you're not going to respond to it the next day, why do you have to see what's in your inbox?
What if you're going to go ahead and respond to now?
Then we should be doing that outside of bed, right? But
Yeah.
that's what happens. That's the last thing that people check and do, and then their brain is waking up instead of decompressing and winding down. Or sleeping with our phones under our pillows not close to us. Put your phones in do not
Yeah.
disturb mode.
This is the downside. I mean, totally different side of constant contact of technology, and
Yeah.
it gives. I mean, for people who are busy and doing things, that's us, that's our clients. Is you're always planning the next thing. The anxiety of not responding, the anxiety of not planning out what you're doing tomorrow. So, but you have access to it. Where, like you said, 100 years ago, people didn't. You just went to bed because that was all there was, and you see them in the morning.
Yeah. And so what's happening now is all of these devices. So think about the watches, to get back to that for a second. They're great, but if you don't put them in do not disturb mode, your head's laying on your arm, all those flashes are going off throughout the night.
Yeah.
When your eyelids are closed, you can still perceive light changes.
Sure.
So now all those flashes, and that's what happens. So part of it too is when you wake up in the middle of the night, you don't have to check your phone. You're not going to send an eloquent email at 3 a.m. It doesn't matter what somebody tweeted. And what ends up happening is it wakes your brain back up if you were asleep. But I mean, if we're honest,
Someone's
right?
wrong on the internet. You got to attack them.
But then now you're up for all this time. It's disrupting your sleep. But here's the other thing. When you check your phones, for us, many times we also are then checking the clock. When you wake up in the middle of the night, it does not matter what time it is. Don't check the clock. Your brain is going to immediately start calculating.
Anxiety.
Yeah, but the thing about it, you're going to think, okay, well, I've been asleep for 3 hours. Am I going to fall back to sleep? I have to be up in 45 minutes. Should I try to fall back to sleep? Oh my gosh, it's 3 a.m. again. I'm up at 3 a.m., which we can talk about why that is. But it's better to not look at it. If your alarm hasn't gone off, if you roll over, you're actually more likely to fall back to sleep and get more restful sleep than all that anxiety kicking in. You don't need the clock displayed on the ceiling above your bed.
Guilty. You're probably going to get into this, but that's where I was curious is to kind of, for those of us that have things wrong in the room or setting up the room or giving us the best chance for good sleep, if you can talk a little bit about just almost like staging. In the sense, like I'm thinking right now as you're speaking, as we see
adult bedtime routine.
What kind of like? Because I'm just thinking
Take
of little
the TV
things
out
like,
of the room.
like little.
Well,
you
she
know,
already said.
we
She already
don't watch
said
TV.
don't get in bed until you're ready to go to sleep.
but just like
No
light.
TV in the room.
Okay, so like we've got a lamp
That's
in
crazy.
the hallway. It's not in our room, but there is light that you can see ambient light coming down. So, and I've heard things about like kids not having night lights and things like that. So just try to black out the room entirely. You know, you were talking before with us about temperature, and so if you can talk a little bit about just preparation.
But I was just eager to buy a bigger TV for the room.
But when are you
I
going to
already blew that
watch it
one.
if you're not watching it in bed?
Yeah, that's a problem.
So I will say this. Take like college students, for instance, or I do have some individuals when they move into other more assisted living spaces and such where their bed may be the only thing to sit on.
Mhm.
If that's the practical case, then what we want them to do is either sit at the edge of the bed, treat it more like a couch, or at least sit on top of the covers. So then that way there's still something triggering when is it time to go to bed, where I turn off the TV, I put the book down, I climb under the covers, and I still have something to indicate and trigger now is the time to sleep. Now for the bedroom environment in general, we know that we want it to be cold enough that we need a cover. That specific temperature varies for lots of different reasons, but we want it cold enough that you need a cover. You want it to be quiet, so you don't have all the volume changes. Even listening to classical music, you have the crescendos and the decrescendos and volume changes. If you need noise, fine, but have it be static noise, a fan, a white noise machine, those things. So cold, dark, quiet, and comfortable. Eye masks are fine. Earplugs are great. Not everybody can do that. You need to hear the kiddos or whatever it is. But those devices can work. But eye masks can be a great option. If you're traveling in a hotel, the little clip hangers that are in the closet, use those to clip the curtains together so less light can come through. All kinds of little things you can do with that to help to reduce that. Put the towel under the door so the light isn't coming in and the sound. We can talk about those pieces. But that a big part of it is really creating that environment that's conducive to sleep. And so when we're getting up in the middle of the night, you don't have to turn on all the lights. That's where you can have, for instance, the motion sensor night lights that when you walk, it lights up, but it's not light the rest of the time. We don't want you to trip and fall and injure yourself on the way to the restroom, but you don't need them on the whole night type of thing. And so that's where, and here's the other thing. If you do wake up in the middle of the night, if you find that you're laying in bed and you've been awake for what feels like longer than probably 10 to 15 minutes, get out of bed.
Mm-hmm.
One of the worst things you can do is lay in bed and try to force yourself to sleep, because now your brain's going to process, now you're going to be exhausted, now you're going to be frustrated, and you're associating the bed with frustration instead of rest and sleep. It's better to get out of bed and do something boring. Empty the dishwasher, fold the laundry, do something until you feel sleepy, and then get back in bed so you're training your body and your brain. The only thing you get to do in bed is sleep.
Awful.
Go do some work.
Go do some laundry.
I didn't say email.
Empty
I
the
didn't say
dishwasher.
screens.
Middle
So
screen.
that was another question I was going to have is any advice for so many of us that will wake up in the middle of the night to try to, uncheck the brain.
Tools to get back to sleep.
Tools to kind of fall back asleep, because a lot of us, like you said, you think about the next day, think about work, think about the grocery list, the kids, the planning, the weekend, the whatever, and it's hard to turn that off.
So one of the best strategies that I've seen work for people is actually to do before you go to bed. So we've been talking about our brain running and racing and all the things we need to do, and then we get in bed. So we're watching the TV that we're not going to do anymore and all these other things. But what we need to do instead is say, all right, brain, I'm going to give you your few minutes. So about 10 to 15 minutes before bedtime, what I want you to do, and I'm going to give this as homework to all your listeners. I want you to take a notepad and a pen, no technology, and you're going to do this outside of bed. On the right-hand side, you're going to write your to-do list for the next day. I have to go to the bank. I have to go to the dry cleaners. I need to follow up with my advisors, all the important things. You're going to write all that down so that your brain doesn't have to be trying to remember it when you're in bed. If you're trying to remember it, it's going to keep your brain awake. So now it's written down. You don't have to think about it anymore, but it's right there when you get up in the morning. And then on the left-hand side, you're going to do a complete brain dump. So what that means is literally everything that's running through your brain. Now, I usually will tell people to set a timer for about 5 minutes because the first minute's going to be high level. Worried about my kids, worried about finances, worried about my health. But the more that you're writing, more and more is going to come out of your brain. Now, we're not creating worries. So don't worry about that because people say, oh, I don't want to worry right before bed. No, it's all in there. We're just getting it out. So the more that you write, you might look at that and say, why was I thinking about that? But you start problem solving through it. So you get it on the notepad, you set it on the nightstand, and you get in bed. And if your brain is still running and racing, you get out of bed.
Or if you forgot one.
If you forgot, right? But that's it, right? So, but you get out of bed.
Get back out of bed.
So you put it on the nightstand. You get out of bed. You write more, and you get back in bed. So just like you would take a puppy and you keep putting it outside to potty, you're taking your brain, you're putting it outside of bed. You're showing it doesn't get to go in bed. And so what happens is that after a few days, it starts to learn, well, one, okay, I get to be productive here. So I don't have to do that when I'm in bed. And you're no longer taking your troubles to sleep with you or trying to force yourself to sleep. So then you would do the same thing if you wake up in the middle of the night and your brain is running. But the key is that if you're doing it before you go to bed, for a lot of people, what happens is they're exhausted. So they'll fall asleep. But then when they have a few hours of sleep and they feel a little rested, now their brain wakes them up and is like, hey, you forgot about me. But if you're dealing with that before you go to bed, then your brain doesn't have to wake you up to process in the middle of the night. But if you do wake up, there's a lot of people. I mean, we can talk about musicians and scientists and all these people that have all these amazing creative ideas throughout the course of the night. They wake up and think about it, write it all down, and put it on the notepad. And then get back to it in the morning instead of turning on the screens and all of the light and everything else. So that's one of the things to get the brain to shut off. The other piece is, and I will tell you, I've literally seen this work successfully for over 20 years with every individual. If you don't have a notepad and a pen, like I did this with some of my military folks, they would have a phone or a device and they would just verbally speak it. Or sometimes if you're just feeling some of that stress and you can't get to it or you don't want to turn on the lights. But we usually try to do it without any technology, so we're keeping that separate. But it's interesting, too, for other folks, aside from that, if it's not just their brain, but you just can't fall asleep again, is that's where those sleep triggers come in. So what are we setting up as our evening sleep routine? Do you have your process as well? Where are you doing certain stretching? Are you doing, you're doing certain activities? PMR is a really great one. Have any of you ever done progressive muscle relaxation? Do you know what it is? So, all right, we're going to have some fun. Take your shoulders, put them up to your ears as high as you can. Oh, come on. Go higher, higher, higher. It's going to feel tight. I heard that pop. Okay, go ahead and drop it. Did you feel the tension that was there?
Yeah.
So,
Releases.
right. So what happens is when you overly tighten a muscle group and you hold it, it fatigues it. So when you release it, it helps to elongate the muscle and relieve some tension. We naturally hold that tension, typing, driving, all things throughout the day. Even, especially if you have people using like a walker, or if they're having to use certain devices and things to hold on to support themselves. So when you do that overly tightening and releasing it, it helps to relieve the tension. So when you do that head to toe, start with the eye muscles, literally the Home Alone stretch, the whole thing through the body, it relieves the tension. And so it helps the body to increase the circulation. It helps it to start to relax, helps your breathing to slow down, and it takes your brain and it's focusing it on the body instead of being focused on the thoughts that you're thinking about. So I have a lot of people that will do that laying in bed. There are free apps for that, and we'll share all that. But that's something that you can do to help the body to relax again. A lot of people will do that right before bed, and they starts to trigger the body to sleep. So figuring out what are a few things that you can be doing to help you to be able to get that relaxation that triggers your body and says, oh, these are my sleep triggers. I have a lot of new parents and grandparents that when they're watching kiddos and then they wake up with the baby monitor or whatever, and then they're amped up, oh, okay, everything's okay. How do I fall back to sleep? So that's where it's, turning the monitor around so you can still hear, but the light isn't shining on you. And then going through that same going to sleep process again resets the brain to realize now it's time to sleep again. And that is, maybe this would be a good time to mention. I know we have the Sleep Well guide here.
Mhm.
All of your listeners will be getting access to the Sleep Well guide. It's 16 different key points and strategies, like the sleep window that we were talking about. There's links to getting things like PMR for kiddo sleep and all these different steps and strategies that they'll be able to get access to as well.
Perfect. So I think you probably hit a lot of this stuff, but what are some key myths, things that are out there that people think helps you sleep? Obviously, I hit the one because it's personal, the TV. But I know there's other ones. You've talked about screens and electronics, but what else is there around sleep and myths?
So let's talk about the snooze button for a minute.
There you go.
So here's the thing. Snooze sleep is not helpful, useful sleep. And here's what I mean by that. And we have a lot of people, and I get it. It feels really good to say no to something. And how many people now schedule that in to their wake up? They set their alarm earlier so they can hit the snooze button. You have people hitting the snooze button 4, 5, 6 times. But here's the thing. So we talked about all the stages of sleep and how our sleep works. We fall asleep, our body temperature starts to drop. We have different chemicals that are being produced. Well, about 2 to 3 hours before we wake up, our body starts the wake up process. So it starts to raise our body temperature. It starts to produce different chemicals. That's actually why so many people wake up around 3 or 4 in the morning, because the typical sleeper, if you're waking up around 6 or 7, well, 3 to 4 is about 3 hours beforehand. That's when the body is starting to raise your temperature, and that's when we're starting to see cortisol being produced. And so people are sensitive to it. They look at the clock, their brain gets amped up, and then now they're awake. But so what happens is that whole process is going on. Now you're ready to hit the snooze button. Well, you've just negated the last 2 to 3 hours of work that your body did and said, just kidding. I didn't mean for you to wake up yet.
Yeah.
And so what's happening is, one, it can actually take up to 60 minutes for your brain to then fully wake up after we're hitting the snooze button and we're disrupting that whole process. Also, what's interesting is that snooze sleep, because it's only about 8 or 9 minutes, that's not enough time to really get back into the restorative stages of sleep. So now you're hovering in that light sleep, like empty calories. I'd rather have people, I'd rather have people set the alarm for 15, 20 minutes later. And then that's why it's good to set your phone further across the room. So when the alarm goes off, you have to get out of bed to turn it off. And it's less easy to then hit the snooze button or stay in bed and then doze back off again. So the snooze button is a really interesting myth that comes up.
Interesting.
I think another one we talked about, that everybody needs 8 hours. Some need more, some need less. I think it's important to note that also a lot of people have tried to convince themselves that, well, sleep is something that is a nice to have, not a need to have. So it is important to note what all the things that sleep has such importance for. It's important for our physical bodies. So as we talked for the gentleman in the room, when you're getting an hour on average less sleep at night, it can age men by about 11 years in testosterone. So the 59-year-old is functioning as a 70-year-old, and so on and so forth. We know that our workouts stop working for us. So that you can actually see in some cases where muscle is getting used before fat, and the body is actually holding on to the fat to fuel the exercise. And so it's harder to lose weight because we need those energy sources. It's really important for our brain health. So when we're sleeping, our brain takes out the trash. That's where we're going to see that all of the toxins that build up to contribute to Alzheimer's and such get flushed out of the system. Our memory, our attention, our focus, even how we respond to challenges. That's why we see disruptions after daylight savings the next few days, where we see increases in heart attacks and car accidents just because of 1 hour on one night. So there's all these different impacts for immune, metabolism. I think it's just important for people to realize that we can't train ourselves to need less sleep, and that sleep isn't this mediocre commodity that we should be getting rid of, but it's actually a superpower that we can all harness if we start reprioritizing it.
So what you do, I was thinking about specific situations. The finding your optimal sleep is obviously, sort of the crux of everything, right? Finding how much you need. But what about, so you got to go to the airport at 3:30 in the morning, and it's a completely one-off event.
Yeah.
You just roll through that, and basically you'll make up for it in subsequent days. Because I know a lot of times people will go to sleep earlier because
and tie into that, if you could, travel, because you do it all the time. So how you handle jet lag if you're jumping time zones. So kind of the same thing if you're gonna have a one-off event.
So if you have a one-off event and your body is used to when to fall asleep, when to wake up, then in general, if you have one night of disruption, everything is going to reset and be okay. If you're constantly sporadic in all different schedules, that's when you start to run into more issues. Now, if you have that day where you're getting up really early for that flight or whatever, those are the days where we would talk about using strategic napping. So if you really are exhausted and you're like, there's no way I'm going to make it to my bedtime, then that's where we would throw in the power nap and do the 20 or 30-minute nap, ideally before 10 a.m., at the latest before 2 p.m., to give your body a little bit of the boost. Go to bed at the typical time the next night so the body can reset on the schedule.
What about pre-planning? What about, like, would you go to bed earlier because you're going to get up earlier, or would you just go to bed at the same time to stay consistent and then make up for it on the back end?
So there's a couple things with that. So again, if it's a one-off in one night, then you're not going to throw off the whole schedule. But that's where we have people that have their week schedule and their weekend schedules, and there's not enough consistency. So you sleep at a certain time throughout the week. Then you stay up late on Friday night and sleep in on Saturday. You stay up late on Saturday, sleep in on Sunday. Well, now you can't fall asleep on Sunday night, not just because you're anxious or whatever else, but because you haven't built up enough sleepiness to fall asleep. And now you're exhausted.
You're not tired enough.
Correct.
Okay.
And then now on Monday, you didn't get enough sleep and you're tired and you start the caffeine and the whole process goes through. So some people will try to go to bed a little bit earlier because they have to wake up earlier. It depends on if you're sleepy enough to fall asleep. Because if you usually go to bed at midnight, now you're trying to go to bed at 9 and your body's really not tired, it may not be helpful. But I will have people that will start to make adjustments if they know, for instance, they're going to be in a new time zone for a period of time, and they'll start doing 30-minute increments to build up to it if they can. If you're only getting 3 or 4 hours and you usually get 8, then yes, you're going to be so exhausted. And if you go to bed an hour or so early that one night, because it's a one-off, it's different than doing it every couple days because you're just sporadic and all over the place. From a travel standpoint, too, it depends on how long you're going to be in the time zone and if you want to adjust to it or not. If you do nothing, on average, it's about 1 hour per day to be able to adjust. So each day, you basically can adjust 1 hour if the body does it naturally. If we want to help with that, some of it is, for instance, like using light to your advantage. So if I'm going to go and get somewhere and I'm going to get there first thing in the morning, I want to do my best to sleep on the plane. Mm-hmm. Sleeping on the plane, eye masks, earplugs, consider declining the meal. Because if you're eating and it's taking 2 and 3 hours, because remember, when you eat, that also impacts your circadian rhythm. So if you start eating at the times that you're going to eat in the new time zone, that also helps to get your body to get on track. But if you get somewhere early in the morning, ideally we'd like to stay awake all day until it's bedtime that next night to reset the clock. That's where we would, again, use a strategic nap. And I always say when you get there, don't put your sunglasses on. Get as much light as possible so the light is triggering the brain to produce the chemicals to stay awake. But if you're going the opposite direction, you're going West Coast to East Coast, now you're going to get there, it's going to be later, you need to go to bed, but you're not tired. Put your sunglasses on at 7 or 8 at night. Let it start to get dark. Get into the hotel room, turn the temperature down, have it be cold. On those days, do a bit more of a workout if you can, so then that way your body is more tired and you've built up more exhaustion, so it's easier to fall asleep. Try to avoid caffeine and sugar so that your body doesn't, and it can, same reason we would try to avoid alcohol on those flights, so that our body isn't using the chemical stimulation and it's able to start resetting on its own. So there's a lot of different things that we can do to make those adjustments.
You just mentioned something about lights and caught my attention yesterday. You said something about turn off the top lights and turn on, as the evening goes on, turn off the top lights, turn on the lamps, the side lamps. Is that to almost simulate a sunset kind of thing? Is that part of it?
Yeah, ideally what we want to do is we want to have that natural progression where it's getting darker throughout the course of the night. Mm-hmm. And so turn off the overheads, have the side lamps so it's more like dusk and the sun is slowly setting and it's less and less light. That's why if you really are going to watch TV, one, it's better to do the TV than the iPads because it's further away from your face. It's less of that light impact. But you also, when it's going to be just the TV on, you have less light, then it's still less light that's filling up the entire room.
I think you said something yesterday. Was it 3, 2, 1? Things you don't want to do before bed.
So a lot of people will talk about a 3-2-1 strategy. So about 3 hours before bed, not doing your exercise. About 2 hours before bed, not eating very heavy. About 1 hour before bed, really trying to start to avoid the screens and the light and a lot of those things as well. Because again, we want our brain to know and to be able to prepare for bed. And so we don't want it to be focusing on digestion. We want it to be able to decompress from being amped up with our workout. We want the lights to be able to be decreased so that our brain knows which chemicals to produce and to prepare for sleep. that's where we run into trouble with substances. So I know we had some questions we were talking about with caffeine, with alcohol. Do you all know how many hours it takes for the body to process out the caffeine in one cup of coffee? How many hours do you think?
How many
guess
milligrams
6.
of caffeine first in that cup of coffee?
Take a regular, I know, great question. Take a regular cup of coffee. So
I'd say
one,
about 12 hours.
I was
Okay.
going to 6.
I know
I mean,
I know
like
some
I don't
people
know
that
the
drink
half-life,
caffeine and
but-
go straight to sleep. So I don't know the answer to this at all.
okay. So, which all are great points. In general, it takes on average about 8 hours for the body to fully process out the caffeine in one cup of coffee. There's a half-life about 5, but we usually see around 7 to 8 hours.
Mhm.
Now, in general, the reason that happens, so how our body works is from the moment we wake up, our body starts producing a chemical called adenosine. And the more and more of that in our body, think of like the heaviness, the sleepiness that we feel. Well, caffeine mimics that. It's very close. It's almost looking like the same chemical structure. So when we have caffeine in our system, it blocks our body from recognizing the adenosine. So think about what I said. It's not that it makes you less tired. It blocks your ability to perceive that you're
Feel tired.
tired.
Mhm.
So that's why you're still tired and you could fall asleep. Now we should talk about your tolerance. If you can have 2 espressos and fall right to sleep. But that's also why some people, it can be dangerous and you have your coffee and you fall asleep behind the wheel. And when you're constantly amping up and using the caffeine and you don't realize that you're tired, well, we feel tired for a purpose. So our body knows to rest and rejuvenate. If we're not paying attention to that and we're just constantly pushing through it, then again, we're going to run at those high RPMs and we're eventually going to burn out. So we want to be cautious that we're not just using caffeine to constantly mask the sleepiness. And I understand survival mode for many people, new babies, certain times of life, things that happen,
Sure.
but short-term versus long-term.
What are your general thoughts around caffeine?
So, I mean, there are tons of people that they want to have their coffee first thing in the morning, and it's fine to do. Ideally, you would have about 6 to 8 ounces of water first before your caffeine. We see that we naturally dehydrate throughout the night and sleeping, and we want to have the water for ourselves, for our body. If you want to have your coffee in the morning, I don't have a problem with it. I know a lot of people that love to do it. Obviously, there's certain health conditions we need to avoid depending on what your doctor's saying. But it's when now we're getting into all of the energy drinks and the coffee and all of the things throughout the course of the day. And that's what you're having to use to keep yourself awake. Or the people that are doing it at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon to try to get through that last hour of work. I think it's important to note that there's a difference between being fatigued and being sleepy. And what I mean by that is we see a lot of people that their brains are tired. There's so much stress. There's so much that's going on. And so that's why a lot of people be like, I got to go to bed. And then you crawl in bed and you can't fall asleep because your body isn't tired, but your brain is. So doing things to give yourself those brain breaks, like if you feel sleepy, it's not always just the coffee, the getting up and the walking to get the coffee. So try to do some of those things before you immediately rely on the chemicals to moderate what your body is doing.
With the caffeine, because you said 1 cup of coffee, about 8 hours, but is there a difference there? Let's say it was a cup of coffee with a shot of espresso. I mean, like everything now,
It compounds.
everything is extra, 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 whether they're at Starbucks or Dutch Bros or energy drinks or whatever. I mean, the milligram keeps going up on the nutrition facts. And so if 100 milligrams is, let's say, 8 hours, do the studies see that if someone consumes 300 milligrams, but all within the same window, are they still getting the reverb of that effect later in the day, later in their sleep, messing things up?
You
Things like
can
that.
see that. I mean, it'd be the same thing as if you think about if you're drinking multiple drinks and you have a double instead of a single, right? Was it usually 1 hour per drink for your body to metabolize? Well, when you're having more and more, that's when you start to feel the buzz and the intoxication and such. Or you have the higher proofs and such where it impacts you. So if you think along that same lines, when you're now doing the 3 and 4 shots and such, of course, that's putting a lot more stress and strain on the system. The other thing to note is that it's simulating that stimulant. So your heart's going to be beating faster. You're going to be breathing faster. Your body is having to run. I keep saying, use the analogy at the higher RPMs.
Right.
So it can cause it to also have more of that crash afterwards because it had to function at a much higher stimulated level. So,
Well, and that's where I just wonder if it has then an ongoing effect where you guys can see it in the REM, in the deep sleep, where there's an adverse effect. So it just keeps fighting each other.
Correct.
You're tired, so you drink more caffeine. So you get more tired, you drink more caffeine, and it's just
and then it's time
chronic
for
problem.
bed, and now you're going to have a few drinks because you want to put yourself to sleep, and you're tired and exhausted, or you're stressed, and so, I have a few drinks, and it helps me to relax. But here's the thing that we talked about last night. On the other end of it is sedation is not sleep. So just because you're unconscious does not mean that you're getting quality restful sleep. And we know that alcohol can be a REM suppressant and it fragments your sleep. It makes you wake up more frequently, not just because of your bladder. Now, I'm not saying you're not going to have your nightcap or you're not going to have a glass of wine with dinner if you can and your doctor says it's helpful, or it's healthy for you. But the thing is, we don't want to be using just the caffeine to constantly keep us awake and then self-medicating with having a few drinks at night to fall asleep. And now we're on this constant cycle where the chemicals are driving a system that our body should ideally be doing naturally.
Okay, on that topic of the chemicals, what's very common now is the over the counters. You know, this stuff, melatonin, you know, everyone's going to talk about that, and there's other things that people find at the grocery store. But if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about that, pros, cons, thoughts around that stuff, but then also
Would you
things,
include
things that you
supplements?
recommend. That's where I'm going to, supplements. You know,
Supplements.
I read about magnesium and some of these others that could be beneficial. If you could give us some input on that.
Sure. So I always have to start with the caveat that I am a PhD doctor, not an MD doctor, so I'm not a prescribing provider. With that being said, obviously I see a lot of it in my patients and my clients, read all the articles, so I can share with you what we know from the research and what we see behavioral sleep medicine specialists typically recommending. I just want to make sure that if your doctor is prescribing something for you, I would always encourage people to go back and talk to their doctors because there are many times there can be a lot of other things that are going on that people don't realize. And based on how your body is processing certain things or other medications that you're on, you can have different impacts. Think of the kiddos that take Benadryl, and instead of feeling sleepy, it makes them bounce off the walls. So when I'm talking about all of these topics, we're talking about for the typical sleeper and individual.
General recommendations, do not specific
Yes.
recommendations.
Yeah.
So from all the different sleep aids, we see some people that are on the really heavy duty meds that their doctors have put them on, your Ambiens, Zolpidems, Trazodones, all of those pieces. Now, some people are taking those because their doctors have them on other things or that's what they say they need. There are other people that have been on it for so long and say that they want to get off them. So I have worked with individuals to do that, obviously with their doctor working with them, and we usually are trying to help them to get on more of the naturally occurring supplements when we can to be things that the body is already naturally producing or things that they'd be getting through diet and nutrition and such if they can. So I'm not saying that people shouldn't, but most people are, when they're trying to get off of those, would rather go to the natural supplements. Along those lines, we find a few that do work well as long as people are using them correctly. And so what I mean by that, I would ideally much rather see somebody doing a melatonin or a magnesium than the Z-Quills, the NyQuils, and all of those pieces, as long as it works for them. But here are the things when it comes to supplements. So melatonin, for instance, if everybody thinks about it, they think, oh, I take my melatonin and it makes me fall asleep. Melatonin is not a sedative or a hypnotic. So what that means is it's not designed to knock you out. It's what's called a phase shifter. So if we look at how our body produces melatonin, about 4 to 6 hours before we go to bed, that's when we see the first spike of melatonin. And so typically the body is producing it earlier, hours before we go to bed, so that the body knows to prepare and start to feel tired and sleepy, and that it helps to set your circadian rhythm. So ideally, they're usually saying take it about 2 to 4 hours, or at least 1 to 2 hours before you go to bed, so that your body is preparing to feel tired and sleepy. When you take it right before bed, yes, you're going to fall asleep, but what's happening is you can see how that's basically extending that sleepiness window. That's why when you get up at 3 in the morning and you can't fall back to sleep and now you pop your melatonin, then you wake up a few hours later and you have the headache or you feel tired and groggy and the sleep hangover and all of that because you were restarting the system halfway through your sleep. So that's one of the things is we want to make sure we're taking it at the right time. We also will see that a lot of people are taking much higher dosages than are necessary and needed. And what happens there is then your body stops producing it on its own. So just like when you have a cast on your arm and the muscles atrophy because they're not being used. So a lot of people are taking way too much. Some of the research shows that people should take as low as a dose of 0.5 milligram to 3 or 5 max, whereas most people are taking 20 and 40 and higher amounts. So we really want to be paying attention to how much that we're taking and how much do we really need to get the desired effects. The other thing that's important to note with a lot of these, and I'll use melatonin as the example, there was a recent study in the Clinical Journal of Sleep Medicine that looked at the top 31 brands across the country. And they found that it ranged from minus 83% to positive 453% of the active ingredient. So what that means is basically a lot of people were buying these things thinking they were getting melatonin.
Don't even know what you're getting.
And it barely had any in it or had way too much, or it had fillers like serotonin and other things. So if you're going to use these, you want to make sure that you get a brand that does third-party testing. So you have an external source that's checking to make sure that you're actually getting what you want to get. So if you're actually getting the melatonin, you're not overdosing yourself on it, and you're taking it at the right time, we can see it have amazing positive impacts on people's ability to sleep. So I'm not knocking it. I just want to make sure that people know enough to be able to take it correctly.
Right.
Same things we see, for instance, with magnesium, which you brought up. So there, I believe now are around 6 different types of magnesium. The most common that people find is something called magnesium citrate. Well, that is often the most common ingredient in stool softeners. So if you're going to take that before bed, you're going to have a runny tummy and your sleep is going to be disrupted.
Never heard of runny tummy.
I'm
Interesting.
going to be
That's
polite
that's a
for
nice way
your...
of saying it.
I like that.
But there's a different type, magnesium glycinate, so G, think G, go to sleep, that we see, again, behavioral sleep medicine specialists recommending that one, what it does is it helps the body to relax. So we see that where most people are taking that about 20 to 30 minutes before bedtime and helping the body to relax. I have a lot of women clients that, especially as they're going through certain hormonal changes and such, and they're starting to see reduction in progesterone and estrogen, and past that, where when we see post-menopause and such as well, where because their body doesn't have the naturally occurring hormones that used to help them to rest and relax, now they're feeling anxiety for the first time in their life, or now they're having trouble sleeping. And the magnesium is one that many doctors will recommend to use to help the body to get some of that natural relaxation again.
Does the time of day on magnesium matter?
Usually, most people would recommend taking it at night, about 20 to 30 minutes before bed, or in the evening time, because if it's setting the body to relax, if you're taking it first thing in the morning, then by the time it's worked its way out of the system and now it's time to go to bed.
Just need another rock star
I had it my pre-workout.
Yeah, I mean,
to overcome your magnesium.
there are some people that they do show that a lot of people have magnesium in their workouts and in their the supplements that they're using. So it depends on the type, it depends on the kind, it depends on what else it's mixed and blended with. So that's why I said there's a lot of the individualized pieces that we have to talk about, and what are you taking it for? There are a lot of people that like to take magnesium before their workout because of what it helps with the body and the muscles and such. The other thing I do want to comment on is that it's really important when people are having sleep issues, whether it's temperature regulation, if we see like restless leg and movements and those things, to check iron levels. Many times iron deficiencies, whether it's in the iron itself, the ferritin, the protein that's transferring the iron, that we see that can play a huge role in a lot of these areas. So that's an important thing to check on top of other types of blood tests that your doctor may have you be doing when you're having a lot of these sleep issues like periodic limb, restless leg, and those kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Melissa weigh in on this as an expert, but it just sounds like so many other areas. It's diets, right? It's diets, it's fitness, it's everything. The core is all the stuff she talked about. You know, the stuff you can do to get yourself in position to have better sleep. But typically people want to go right to the top of the pyramid, you know, for the supplements. The supplements are going to be the magic answer. I don't know how much sleep I need. I'm going to read my screen. I'm going to watch TV. I'm going to do everything wrong. But if I take that magnesium,
pill,
that's going to do it for me.
And the melatonin.
And that, I mean, that's just like anything, right? Everyone's looking for the magic
quick
bullet.
fix.
And unfortunately, it's the things you can, you know, like she said for an hour here, the things you can actually do to get better sleep. I mean, those
versus
help,
easy.
right? Those help.
Simple
But
versus easy.
tip of the pyramid, not the base. That's not the first thing you go to.
Training's better. Training's better.
If you can get your body on that consistent schedule of when you're going to bed, when you're waking up, it learns and if it knows that you're going to give it sleep every night, then it doesn't have to feel sleepy and crave the naps throughout the day because it knows that that's coming. And when you're sleeping at the right time at night and you're getting that consistent schedule, then your body can allocate the right amount of resources for your mind to repair and for your body to repair. So there's those pieces, but we also want to be able to shut off our brains. We want to make sure it's not saying the technology is bad, but we're using it in ways that are helpful.
Yep.
We want to associate our bed with that rest and with sleep. So there's a lot of those core pieces, that consistency of the schedule, when we're eating, what we're doing, how that whole process is working, that it's good that we can take back control over it instead of feeling so helpless.
I think we shifted out of tools to get back to sleep a little quick. So go through two or three.
Other than emptying the dishwasher.
Yeah. Jason's not.
Other than doing any
Jason's
work
not anxious
whatsoever.
to do anything other than get back on the phone.
Well, the whole point is that if you're finding that you're awake and you really feel like you can't fall back to sleep, we don't want to lie in bed and just will ourselves to sleep, because that's not going to work. And we're just going to get more and more frustrated, and we're going to focus on the fact that we're not going to sleep. So doing things like the writing, and it's not formal journaling, it can be bullet points. Some people like to draw, but something that just helps to focus the mind and take the pressure off having to fall back to sleep is an option. We say do something boring. The reason I use the example of empty the dishwasher or fold the laundry is I don't want you to be doing something that's going to wake your brain up. So I don't want you to be like, well, great, now is when I'm going to pay my bills or when I'm going to check my email and start reading this, work brief or whatever it is.
Low stimulation.
Correct. Now, if you are going to watch TV or you are going to read or do some of those other things, you would want the TV on, but further away, low lights. We wouldn't want to be doing that in bed. Ideally reading a book versus our devices. If it's on the devices, put it in night mode, by the way. Black background with white lettering. You see how bright it is with a white screen? When you have the black, it's emitting less light. So we can do things to distract the brain, but things like the PMR will work. Also, a lot of individuals would do things called grounding exercises. So those are strategies that help the brain to refocus away from whatever is keeping it up and kind of help it to be a bit mundane. That's why counting sheep was something that people used to do a lot of, but now you can do that rotely. Okay, 1, 2, 3, you start thinking about something else. So do something that engages the brain slightly, like take 143 and subtract 17. And then subtract 17 again. You get down to 129 and your brain had to engage and think a bit. Or trying to come up with, what are 10 European capitals or 10 types of apples or berries or different things that engage the brain enough, but not something that's work related that triggers emotion and gets you woken up like that. And then what are some of the other things that you can do through that pattern? For some people, is it that, you have the process of washing your face, brushing your teeth, but are there a couple things that you did before bed, whether it was stretching or things like that, that trigger the brain to know that it's time to sleep again?
Got it.
So what things, I know this isn't our problem, but it could be somebody's or one of our clients, but you talked a lot about sleeplessness and all things you can do to help fall asleep or get back to sleep. But when would somebody know that maybe they had a more serious issue around sleep?
Sure, great question. Sleep apnea is a big one. And so there's kind of sleep apnea and also sleep problems in general. What I will first say is if you are that person that you're sleeping through the night, maybe you're not even waking up a bunch, but you are still always feeling tired, that's going to be a big indicator because your sleep isn't working for you anymore. You have somebody that's eating all the meals and they still feel hungry. They have a really high metabolism. We need to figure out what's going on with how their body is either processing it or not absorbing it. So if you have somebody that's sleeping through the night and you're still feeling exhausted, that's step one. We need to figure out why your body isn't using sleep correctly. We have a lot of people, if you are told that you're snoring, that's going to be an indicator that there is the reason that you're snoring is there's something that is obstructing the air from getting into your lungs. So it could be that you're congested. It's allergy season. It could be that you have other issues and sleep apnea. So that would be a check. Also is your waking up patterns. So for instance, for an indicator for sleep apnea, I'll have a number of clients that'll come into my office and say, doc, I sleep really well for the first 2, 3, 4 hours. And then I'm finding that I'm up every hour and a half. Well, because what's happening is they're waking up the first cycle of sleep, there's no REM sleep.
Sure.
So, but when they're getting into REM sleep, now their body is waking them up because it's saying, I need to breathe. I need you to breathe. And so if you're seeing that pattern where you sleep really well for a few hours and then you keep waking up, that could be another indicator that you could potentially have sleep apnea. Here's the thing. Going in and getting a sleep study doesn't automatically mean that they're going to make you wear the machine and they're going to make you do the CPAP. So many people don't want to go and do it because they're like, then they're going to put me on it, so I'm not going to use it. Or if they don't want to go into the lab. Now you can do an at-home sleep study. And that's also a really great option, is that you can do it in your own bed and still get the general information from it. Once you find out if you have sleep apnea, if that is the case, then we can figure out, is it mild, moderate, or severe? And that's going to change the different treatments that people can do. From working with, and if you're going to work with dentists on it, I always recommend using somebody that's been boarded by the AADSM, the American Academy of Dental Sleep Medicine, because they've gone through years of training to specifically know how to do adjustments and such for that. There are lots of treatments that people can do there. CPAP machines obviously are a great gold standard, but not everybody can tolerate it. So I just don't want people to basically be deterred from doing that to figure that piece out. If you have folks that are having the restless leg and a lot of the movements, folks with chronic pain, there are a number of those things that also are disrupted. And unfortunately, we do see pain rates higher at night. because with melatonin increasing and cortisol decreasing, we see changes in inflammation and such. So there's things with even adjusting the pillows so that your spine can be aligned and other pieces as well. But with more of the severe sleep things, it's looking at those sleep patterns that can be a big part of it.
Makes sense.
Also, your heart rate variability. If you see it spiking a lot and you see the higher heart rates, if you're doing the trackable devices while you're sleeping, we'll see a lot of that during REM sleep if you have a lot of stress currently going on, because your brain is trying to process through what it didn't get the time to do during the day. So if you start to see those spikes, then that also is an indicator that we want to maybe look at treating some of the stress and the anxiety that could be potentially reducing your ability to get restful sleep. And that's why you're feeling more tired when you're waking up. We haven't talked a ton about the stress and anxiety and burnout, but that does play a big role, because if you're higher levels of that, your body isn't going to let you rest because that's considered a more vulnerable state where you can't protect yourself as well.
Right.
More on
Jason?
your list, Jason?
We could go all day.
I know. This is,
I love this stuff's fascinating though.
it is.
You know,
It is.
because I remember when I was younger, and I'm sure that you guys, when I say you, I mean the industry, the research, where they've figured out why we need sleep. But I remember there was a period of time where they didn't really understand why the body had to be shut down for so long, why we actually needed sleep. But that seems to be pretty much solved at this point. But do you think there's going to be a period of time? I mean, we're still talking about evolution, but do you think there's going to be a period of time where our bodies won't require as much or require sleep? Or do you think this
Superchargers?
is
Superchargers versus wall chargers?
the way we're built? But it's just kind of the way that we're built.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because, right, society used to tell us you snooze, you lose. Time is money. Who was the first person to show up and the last person to leave? And if you were tired, it meant you were dedicated. But what's interesting is now we're realizing that when we're not getting that right amount of sleep, it actually makes us less productive. We're more likely to multitask. We see 40% reduction in production time in terms of how productive we are. The reason I'm saying that is what I think we're actually starting to find is that a lot of people have very varied in terms of the amount of sleep that they need, but we haven't been giving ourselves nearly enough sleep to get it. And now with stress levels increasing, for some people, we're actually needing more and more sleep because it's putting such a strain on the body. So if anything, we're almost going in the opposite direction but in general, that around like 7-8 hours average of sleep is something that has stayed pretty consistent across the decades, across the generations and the centuries. I will have to say I can't imagine right now that people will need less and less, because we're actually finding that I think people are realizing that they need more and more, but people are going to continue to try to find ways to do less to fit more in their day. But that's where we see people burning out so much, because the demands are exceeding the resources that are available. And even for things you care about, think about caregivers or even volunteering. You love these things, but sometimes it's just like, oh my gosh, I need a day off.
Too much, yeah.
Sorry to disappoint on that one.
I think we keep Melissa talking forever, but I want to Joe Rogan her. So give us, so we'll kind of try to wrap it up a little bit, but give us one simple step everyone could take today to improve their sleep, and then we'll give our biggest takeaway from all of your information.
I would say that one is just the mindset, the way that you're looking at sleep is to shift it from thinking that there's nothing I can do about it, there's no way that my sleep is just going to be a disaster, to realizing that you really can take that control back, even just reframing that, thinking of sleep being something that you enjoy instead of that thing of dreading your bed because, how long am I going to be awake? Am I going to sleep tonight? Am I just wasting my time? I think it's shifting the way that we look and think about and reprioritize our sleep. I think practically it's having that consistent schedule of the bedtime and the wake time. And honestly, that writing that you're doing for that brain dump before bedtime, that you don't have to call it worry time, it could be process time, gives your brain back that decompression time, so then your sleep can start working better for you.
Good. Jason.
Yeah, this was great. And I think you made a good point for me. I mean, I think so many of us, you just assume that's the way you are. I'm a bad sleeper, or this is the way I've always been. This is who I am. That's just me. I'm just not a great sleeper. But reframing it where, no, you actually can improve it. You can change it. So, no, a big takeaway for me is actually the creating that window. It's going to be a little scary at first because I don't go to bed at 11 o'clock at night. But if that's all the sleep that I'm really getting, squeeze it and then build from there. That's a great takeaway for me. And also, next time I'm in a hotel, I'm going to pull those hangers out of the closet and clip. I've never thought of that.
Have you
That's
ever
a great
used
idea.
sleep dots?
Mm-mm.
You can get think of like the decals that you put on your window for the holidays. You can peel off. They have ones that they sell that are black or dark brown, and you can put them over all of the little lights in a hotel room that keep you up at night, and then you can peel them off when you leave, and it doesn't cause any kind of issue, but it helps to reduce all of the light triggers.
Oh, that's good.
Interesting.
Yeah, and turning off more lights in the house too. We just have too much ambient light.
Yeah.
And so even when you're in bed, you can still see the room.
Yeah, lights.
You know, that makes a big point.
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing for me is, as you talked, it draws so many parallels to, you know, to being an athlete, to training, to creating a financial plan, to, you know, health and wellness, you know, your diet. I mean, there's so many people always looking for the quick thing, you know, something to fix it, when the truth is a lot of the things are in your control. They may not be necessarily things you want to do. I mean, we all want to read our phone and, you know, we like to watch TV and all the things that, you know, maybe are fun, but that's not optimal. And if you're really concerned about your sleep, just like if you're concerned about your, you know, your fitness, your diet, your anything, then you kind of have to, like you said, take back control. And the one thing I really learned was I never thought about the efficiency of sleep. I always thought about, well, you're in bed like 8 hours. I mean, I know if you're not asleep, that doesn't count, but I didn't think like, hey, if you only need 6, you just make it efficient and get it done in 6, rather than I'm a big hate wasting time person. Yeah. So, you know, you spend 10 hours in bed to get 6, like that's wasted 4 hours for no reason. So that's really interesting and something that, you know, try to make a change on.
Yeah, I think for me, figuring out how to get back to sleep in the middle of the night, because I'm a big get out of bed person anyway, but then I'll go, and everybody here will tell you, emails come in at 2 and 3 in the morning all the time. I go straight to, you know, just getting stuff done. So anyway, that's got to change somehow.
Well, and some of that is, as we said, if you do some of the writing before
Yep.
you go to bed. I also have a lot of people that I recommend that they do that actually at the end of the workday. Because what happens is you're still thinking about it, and then you're with your family, or it's in the evening, and then you don't really get to decompress. So if you take the last 10 minutes of your workday and write your to-do list of exactly what you want to do the next day, it gives your brain permission to let go of it and not having to hold on to it. So that's another thing that just kind of helps it to be able to get there.
Yeah.
But I like the little activities that aren't too much of an activity. I'm definitely using those, because I would try to count sheep or just count numbers or do whatever. But now, like naming types of apples or European capitals or just strange random things that you're thinking, but you're not thinking about emails. You're not thinking about, you know, what the kids' practice schedule is the next day or things like that, or, you know, Thanksgiving and who's coming over. You're just naming random things, and I would definitely fall back asleep.
But
It
not
engages your brain,
but not
but-
unloading the dishwasher.
No, I'm still in bed.
It's not going.
I'm
It's not
still
doing
in
that.
bed with this scenario.
So I know, I mean, as long as we talked and as much information as we got, I know we just scratched the surface on this, and I'm sure people have other questions that we didn't bring up, unfortunately. Tell people where they can find you, where they can ask questions, where they can get more information, because it was phenomenal.
Thank you. So my company is called Mind Impact Consulting. That's the website, mindimpactconsulting.com. On that website, they can access my Wellbeing Wednesday video library. I started it in January of 21, and there's about 180 to 200 videos on there right now. They're 3 minutes, very short, go through all different topics for stress, anxiety, sleep, every different aspect. And you can go through and watch it really quickly to get a few practical tips and strategies. So that's available to them. I have resources like the Sleep Well Guide on there to help individuals to be able to go through all different tips and strategies. I know we didn't even get into things like pets and kids and so many other topics. So, and all of my contact information is there as well. People can also follow me. I'm on all the social media channels. So I put out still those videos every couple weeks. So if they want to connect on LinkedIn or Instagram, Facebook, whatever their preferred social media channel is, those are available as well. But people can send me an email and connect with me through the website if they have a question that they want to ask for themselves or asking for a friend that they don't want to talk about, like the snore monster sleeping next to them.
Perfect.
Well,
Yeah,
I want to say thank you for coming. This is pretty
thank
awesome. We really appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
yeah. For us, this is one of our first forays out of just finance. You know, I mean, we talk about taking care of clients and their well-being, and that includes obviously more than just their portfolio. And so hopefully people appreciate this, and we'd love to hear feedback on it, because we'd like to do more of this. This is again, sleep is just, essential to everybody. And like I said, as people get older, it seems to get worse. So I know everybody's interested in this one, but really, really happy to have you on, and hey, maybe we can do it again in the future and get to pets and kids and everything else. This is our final mid-quarter roundtable of the year. We're getting into the holidays, so wishing everybody a happy Thanksgiving and happy holidays, Merry Christmas. And we'll do it again. We'll do it again in the new year. As always, you can find this on YouTube where you can watch it, or the podcast. All this information is on our website, and we really look forward to doing it. Hopefully, you get something out of it. And like I said, enjoy the holidays, enjoy the rest of 24, and we'll see you in 25.
Sweet dreams.
Sweet dreams. That's good.
And finally, we'd like to thank Amundi Pioneer for sponsoring this podcast and our time with Dr. Milanak.